Are you already 2-3 years in a CPG business and don't know how to grow bigger and have a profitable business? You are unclear about your financial planning, production cost, how much profit margin should I have? So all these answers you will get in this episode. In this episode, you will learn the key insight and overall holistic approach to have a profitable business and grow in a right channel which works for you on your terms. Join in. I want to start with a question.
Yeah.
Then what inspired you to come in the good, like a food CPG community, and why finances especially?
That's a great question. So I'm a former food business founder, and my experience as a founder was one where we were doing everything right. We were hitting industry standards. We were doing things the way they're supposed to be done. And we weren't financially viable. We weren't sustainable. We, in looking at the numbers, it was like we would have to change our entire business model and really make significant changes in order to attempt to achieve profitability while being the business that we wanted to be, which was local and regional and part of a very specific community. And after 2 years, we closed that business because we couldn't identify a way that felt good to us, that also would allow us to earn a living running the business. So long story short, I moved on from that experience, and I had many different roles in the food industry, mostly as a buyer, but over time got very focused on the financials because I could see over and over and over again that these businesses, these good, sustainable, local, right, like focused on transparency and equity, they were struggling financially because they too were following industry standards, and based on size or any other like number of factors, they weren't getting the financial results that they needed to stay in business. And so I worked on, different projects where we experimented, quite frankly, and said, well, what if we change the way we think about food costs? Or what if we broke this norm and did things differently? And we were successful. And so after doing that a few times, started to gain some confidence in this philosophy and this way of going about business. And then it just became too important to keep to myself, because I want good food to win. I want good food founders to have the businesses that they want. And most importantly, I want real food, good food on as many tables and in as many homes as possible, regardless of demographic or income status or any of those factors, right? I think that food is a right, and I want more people to have it.
Yeah, amazing. And it is so mindful approach here. I see, like in our brand studio, Mindsy, we stand for mindful branding and creating a meaningful impact for people, for this generation and for upcoming generation too. Being a mom, even I want that upcoming generation get a good food option around this ocean and clutter market, right? But at the same time, when you are saying this, your experience, how 2 years was challenging for you and how financial, seeing that side. And the second side of coin, I see, especially closely working with women entrepreneurs in better for you products. This intention of episode is they are not feeling confident about how to even. You learned in the middle of the businesses that it was not working and how I can make things work for me. But even in the starting, people are so passionate with their ideas and products, and they are so focused in that. But when it comes to build a brand, and like I had recent interview with a woman entrepreneur, and she said, I don't know how much profit margin I should have. I don't know how I do the cash flow planning. She has no literacy about financial planning. And I was like, yes, this is what we need to help them, because to take a next step, they need to feel confident in their financial setup too, as well as the product and the users and the brand. But this is like also the core business which drives them. And so thank you so much for joining. And I'm so excited.
So what we're going to talk about today, as you mentioned, Asha, is launching your food business with financial confidence. And specifically 4 things to sort of know or to start to think about before you go to market. Now, at the Good Food CFO Well, here, I'll go to the next slide and I'll show that
Mhm.
I have two businesses essentially, all with the same end mission and goal as I just discussed. So there's Sarah Delevan Consulting, where we provide one-on-one services through fractional CFO and financial consulting. And then there's the Good Food CFO, which is our podcast, our community, and then our courses, tools, and resources. So we could talk about how to create a financial forecast and how to set up your cash flow tools. We could do that, but we're going to actually zoom out and talk about four sort of even more important things to kind of know and understand before you approach that work. That's what we're going to dive into today.
Yeah.
And this is an actual quote. It's a lot of words. Hopefully you can see it on your screen, but this is an actual question that I received from a founder who was really feeling scared. And she said, my challenge continues to be, how do I scale my production so that I can support my future sales growth? I feel I need to take out another big loan to grow my business to the next level, and that scares me. She had already invested a significant amount of money to get the branding and the foundations for the business in place, but she did not anticipate the expense for taking the business production to the next level. And she asked, in your experience, how do most companies do it? And the reason I start this conversation with this quote is because this boils down to cash flow and understanding how things like your price, your vision for your business, and how quickly you want to grow all affect your ability to scale your business. I think that, I have an MBA, and there are things about business that I know now that I did not learn in that education. And the things I learned in my work life are the things that are guiding me and the most valuable. So this is sort of the crux for what we're going to talk about today, because I don't want founders to find themselves in this position 2-3 years in, like I was saying to themselves, oh no, I don't know how to get any bigger, but I need to get bigger in order to have money to be profitable, right? You find yourself in a real financial conundrum, if you will. So most businesses fail because they launch without the founder thinking through the type of business they want to build. So yes, you want to be a food business. Yes, you want to be a better for you brand, but what beyond that is your vision for your business? How and when will the business be profitable? This is really important. This is a break-even analysis, right? It's how this is often called. And not only that, but number 3 is incredibly important as well. How much money will it take to get to profitability, to get to break even? And if you haven't done this work, and if you haven't thought through the 4 things that we're going to talk about in more detail today, you find yourself in a position like I was in, and a position like the founder who entered, who submitted that question was in. So the good news is that you can map a lot of this out before you launch. And that's really what we call launching with financial confidence. Now, will everything work out perfectly? No, it's called work for a reason, right? And it is hard, and it can take time, of course, to reach your goals. So the 4 things, there we go, to know before you go to market. So one is the importance of having a vision for your business and how you think about goal setting before you launch. And then we're going to talk about why it's critical to know the cost to produce your products and what goes into calculating those costs. I know that a lot of folks who are launching a business have a lot of questions around cost of goods sold and how to figure out what your true costs are. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then what margin is. And this is a big one, because your margin on your products has a big impact on your pricing, your cash flow, and your profitability. And all of those things are associated with your ability to scale your business, your ability to have the money that you need to grow. And then lastly, we want to think about important factors for scaling a business. Now, this is profitability, this is financial sustainability, and the big one, leveraging debt. And this is big, this idea of leveraging debt. And I want to pause here for a second, because a lot of founders in what I call the good food space, we have a negative idea about debt. investors, right? Having people invest in your business, that's looked at positively, but investing or taking on a lot of debt can be looked at negatively. We want to talk a little bit about that and sort of level the playing field on emotions around debt and leveraging debt. But then I also want to put into perspective how big businesses leverage debt to get where they are and how that can differ for, an emerging or brand new brand in the food industry.
That's very interesting because debt word is people really get scared with.
Yeah. I was scared about it for sure. But for good reason, right? Because I'd closed a business where when we closed that business, we had to pay off debt afterward, and that's a reality. So, but I think going in with your eyes open, that's what this is all about, right? These 4 things that you can do to launch with financial confidence are all about preparing yourself, So the first thing is create a vision for your business. Now, the type of business that you want to build informs who you're going to sell to and how your product is going to get to customers. Now, it's very possible that your vision for your business will change over time. But thinking about your vision, what is it today that I am building and what is it that I want to have in 5 years or 10 years, right? Whatever it might be for you is really important and helps you to understand what am I going to need to achieve this vision.
Absolutely. In brand strategy also, like when we do the brand workshop, it is very important to find out what is your vision, where are you right now, and what is your point A and where you want to go at point B, because without a vision, you don't know which direction you are going and you are like shooting in the blind, like a dart, that's kind of situation. But as your vision and mission over time, they change or organically take a shapes according to the need of users. But what is the purpose of doing it? Why you doing what you do? That is the main soul of the brand. So yeah, I truly connect with vision is very important to set where you want to go and having.
Yeah, I love that. And as well, like in same lines of this, the size that you wish to grow to, the pace at which you grow, and the partners needed to support the vision of the business, right? Those are all going to they're all going to play a role in what your margins are when you think about pricing your product. They're going to have an effect on how cash flows through your business, right? So if you're working with big distributors, the cash is going to flow through your business differently than if you're working with independent markets and independent grocers, right? Different terms, different margins. And we're going to kind of dive into that. And your reliance on debt is something else that's going to be different based on how you want to grow your business and how big you want to be and how fast you want to grow it. So these are all things, as you said, Asha, to get clear on, not just for your finances, but also for your branding and for understanding who your customer is. But the number of businesses, I'll back up for a second and say that as a CFO, a lot of the businesses that we work with are existing businesses. And so when they onboard with us, they've found us because they're in some sort of financial trouble. And we are trying to right the course, of their ship, if you will. And sometimes we can't because they're simply they're too far in. A radical price change or a radical change in business model would take a long time to kind of make work, and they might not have the cash or the ability to fund, that kind of change. So if you think about these things in the beginning, you can prepare and be as best prepared as you possibly can be to grow successfully into the business that you want to have.
That's really solid and interesting. Is how do startup or scalable founders, they are already in the market and they kind of have an idea of their user or price point, what they're putting it. But I'm not sure they have done that enough calculation. So how do they preserve themselves to getting that running out of cash flow or burnt out at that phase? And what do you share thoughts on that? Like, how do you prepare them, or what do you navigate to do the right thing in the start?
Well, what we always do is we back up and say, okay, what is the vision that you're trying to achieve, right? And what needs to happen in the very near future. And then we do an analysis of many of the things we're going to talk about today and say, where do you have things working well for you to achieve your goal and where don't you? And then, if it's a pricing kind of thing, right, where we maybe need to raise price or we need to change margin, we might pull back in a sales channel, we might push forward in another sales channel, right? You have options once you've already started, but at the core is going to be the same things that we're talking about here. Get clear on your vision so that you can make decisions and take action, know your costs, understand your margins and your price point, and then determine what makes sense for you as far as like how quickly to grow or to change what you're doing. And as we go through this, we're going to talk, as I said, specifically about margin and how your margin impacts your business. Because a lot of people might say, I was on a LinkedIn thread yesterday and it was 40% margin. That's a standard for a national brand. Well, it doesn't have to be. And what does it mean if 40% is your margin? What is the financial implication of that in your business? And does that work for your plan? Does that work for the amount of money that you have? Does it work for the amount of debt that you have the ability to leverage? That's a really important piece. And all of that goes into making these decisions. And along those lines, as I pointed out, the sort of, 40% margin as sort of an understood or sort of widely touted, standard for working with the distributor. When you're building a business, it doesn't have to be a national brand with $1 million in sales within 5 years. You don't have to have investor funding. You can be self-funded. You can have private funding. You don't have to have an exit strategy from day one, right? You might want all of those things. And if you do, wonderful. But what I hope is that people won't feel pressured into building a business in a certain way because of what they're seeing as industry standards or, talked about in the world of CPG. Today's technology has and continues to expand the options for how you can build your business. And in addition to that, the growing number of independent and small chain stores, we have a couple really great small chains here in Southern California, means that you get to choose how you grow. So I want to touch on 4 channels before we dive further into the information that I want to share today. So you can choose to go direct to consumer, right? So there's no one between you and the person consuming your product, using your product in their day-to-day life, right? There is the option to go wholesale direct, which means you are selling directly to a retailer who is then selling to your end consumer. So that's a one middleman, as I like to call it, relationship. Then you've got distribution, and distribution is where you sell to a distributor. The distributor sells to a retailer, and then that retailer sells to your end consumer. So there's 2 middlemen, right, in that relationship. And then with the advent of Mabel and Fair and so many other great B2B e-commerce websites, we have what I call a B2B e-commerce hybrid. So there's a bit of it's like wholesale direct, but there's a platform between you and the retail store that helps to facilitate that sale. And so there's still sort of 2 middlemen in that relationship, in that you're paying, or 2 parties are taking a percentage of your product price. And that'll make a bit more sense as we get further on.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just curious, how is that different, Sarah, than doing a retail distribution? Okay, in the store, and this is just the online e-commerce store, right? But still there are 2 layers, 2 middle.
Yeah, so that's a great question for clarification. So your product is still going to a physical retail store. But the retailer, instead of going directly to you, as in a wholesale direct relationship, they're coming to you through a platform. Like a website, an e-commerce platform for them to make purchases. And that platform takes a percentage of your sale price. So when it comes to the financial piece, while you are selling directly or delivering directly to that retailer, from a financial perspective, there is an additional cost of doing business that way. And so that's why I list it as a separate kind of channel, if you will.
And do the founders price the product separately to all these 4 channels?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another great, you're asking like all the right, like perfect questions, because I have a little chart that shows us 3 of the channels and how to think through that today. So this is so perfect. Okay. So a thought here is just to set growth goals that align with your financial goals. And this will make, a little bit more sense, as we work through this information, but choose who you want to sell to, right? According to the vision that you create for your business. And in that same light, set growth goals that align with your financial goals. If you want to be a national brand in 2 years, that takes a heck of a lot more money than being a brand that sells in 3 states by the end of the year, right? Launching into 1 national retailer takes a different amount of money than launching into 3 retailers. And so another area where we see people struggle financially is thinking, okay, the faster I do this, the better. But then they get partway into the process and they've found they are short on cash to make this happen. So just another note to and you're so great about this, Asha, to center yourself and to remember, what is my vision for this business? What is it that I want to build? And what is the pace that is right for me and my team and my cash flow?
Yeah. And it's so intentional approach, like what is doable for you right now. It doesn't mean that it is working for everyone, but what is in your hand, your capacity, how much team you have, and how much intentional you are, or going in all direction and get burnt and then they stop and not feel excited about their own business. So that's what mindful approach is, that founder doesn't need to feel overwhelmed and burnt, but be intentional about what is doable in my hand first. So this is very interesting.
Exactly. Okay, so we want to dive next. We've got this vision, right, for the business. We understand what kind of business do we want to build? Where do we want to be selling our product? National, regional? Is it national through distribution? Is it national but through independent retailers via the B2B e-commerce hybrid, right? So you can think about all of these unique and interesting ways that your brand can exist in the world. And when you got that idea in place and you understand, okay, this is who we want to be as a brand, and this is how we want to grow and to get our product to more people. Then we need to think about the pricing and the profit margins of our product in the channels that we want to sell in. Okay. And this is important because, as it says here, so much of your financial success hinges on your pricing and your gross profit margins. And this is going to get hopefully super clear for you guys as we work through the rest of this conversation. But the need to knows here are the cost of your product, as specifically as you possibly can get. No back of the napkin, no estimations. Like, let's really drill down and get specific, because a lot of people will say this, like, food it's all about the pennies. And if you can save a penny here and shave a penny there, like, that has an impact financially for your business. So no detail is too small when it comes to this. The next thing you need to know is what your pricing will be in every channel that you plan to sell in. So you might be at a farmer's market right now with a vision for being a national brand in what we'll call independent grocery stores, right? Then you need to understand from day one, what will my price point be at the market, and what will my price point be and my margins be, therefore, in the channels that I want to sell through in the future. And I've got a real life example of how not doing this ended up very badly for a brand who had to do a lot of like backtracking and price changing and size modifications and things like that to kind of get on the right track. The last thing you need to know is what your gross profit margins will be in each of those sales channels, right? Based on that price that you've determined, because this has a large impact on your cash flow. And as I said earlier, how you'll be able to fund the growth of your business. And if I do say so myself, there's an awesome podcast called Rethinking Cash Flow on the Good Food CFO. And I should have written down the number, but I haven't, the episode number, but it really dives into a lot of detail about this. We're going to kind of like scratch the surface here today. So the first thing on our list was understanding what it costs to make your product. Mount Hope Farms gave me permission. They're one of our community members, and they're part of our, weekly CFO office hours that we do. So I just wanted to thank her for letting me use her photos here. But your cost of goods are the costs that you must pay in order to produce, sell, and deliver your product. Now you'll see that the top 3 items on my list here are in bold, because these are the absolutes. Every business has them no matter what, right? You have ingredients, you have packaging, and you have labor of some sort, either yourself, individuals on your team, or a co-packer producing your product. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, you're going to have shipping and delivery fees if you're selling via your website, right? And shipping. You're going to have shipping and delivery if you're shipping to a retail store. You're going to have what they call freight, which is the same as shipping and delivery if you're working with the big distributor. So this is a cost that you may not know exactly what they're going to be on day one, or as you're preparing to launch, but doing research on these things, weighing your products, figuring out these types of nitty gritty details will have a lot of value to you as you grow the business. And the last one here is merchant fees. As we move away from being a cash-based world and we are using credit cards and ACH and, payment processors for nearly every transaction, we want to take these into account as well. I mean, they're 2.9% in a lot of cases, plus anywhere from 10 to 30 cents per transaction. So recognizing this as a cost of goods, right, as a part of the transaction to sell your product, I think is also really important. And then, of course, we want to talk really briefly about what is not a cost of goods sold. So these are anything that wasn't on that previous list. Your rent, your labor that has nothing to do with production. So if you've got a salesperson, if you've got an admin person, right, they're not considered a cost of goods sold. Your insurances are not a cost of goods sold. Your utilities, even your marketing, when you're thinking about standard marketing, is not a cost of goods sold. The gray area for marketing is when we're doing ad spend and different things like that. We want to factor into, we want to be aware of that and be thinking about that, but it's not considered a true cost of goods sold. The way we're thinking about it today is the core things that we need to know the cost of in order to price our product successfully.
So when they are starting a business, Sarah, I had a recent client and she was like, I don't know how to price my product in the starting. Of course, she will compare the competitor prices and we were looking around the competitor landscape. How do they take care of this not cost things beforehand, or they just, when they are starting or in a mid-level, they just need to focus on the core, the previous slide, what you shared?
I recommend that before launch. So it's sort of like a very, what's the word? Holistic approach, right? You need to drill into what are my costs and what price point maybe do I want to sell at, right? Because of the competitive landscape. And then what does that give me as a margin, a gross profit margin for my product and for my business? Then you also want to look at what are my costs that are not my cost of goods. What is my rent going to be every month? What is my utilities, insurance, other team member expenses? What are they going to be? With those 2 pieces of information, you can determine what your break-even point is and what your profitability point is. And we're not diving into that math here today, but that's critical it's critical, and it's the outcome of doing some of the things that we're going to talk through today. Because if you don't know that it's going to take you 25,000 units to break even, that's a big surprise when you're a couple of years in, right? You might not be prepared to produce the amount of product that you need to break even. I've had people go through the break even analysis and say, you know what? This business in this version, in this model that I've been thinking about is not for me, because I will be baking my cookies day and night and never get to sleep if I want to make, $30,000 salary for myself each year. So people have done the break-even analysis after thinking through a lot of these things and doing this work and said, not this iteration, not this version. Let me go think about it. Let me think if there's some other way to do this or some other model that might be better suited for me. So to answer your question more specifically, you want to do both. You want to consider both as you're thinking about launching your business. So when we're talking about pricing our products, this is really important to know the difference between markup and margin. Margin is a weird math formula. I'm actually going to show it to you on the next slide. Markup is a very easy math formula, but it is a best practice in the CPG world to use margins instead of markup. You might find like a co-op or some other sort of, small businesses who may do their business in terms of markup, but the vast majority of retailers, all national and vast majority of regional distributors, they all do business on margins. And so you want to have consistent math, right, throughout all of the folks that you deal with internally and externally in your business. And margin is how we understand that break-even point. It's how we understand, is this enough of a margin, enough money to make our business work and to be sustainable. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that you want to be dealing in margin versus markup, and the fact that they're not the same. Mm-hmm. So here are your, like a little disclaimer here, or not a disclaimer necessarily, but profit as a percentage of sale price is what your margin is. Right? So when someone says the distributor takes a 25% margin, that 25% comes out of the price that they sell your product to the retailer for. So it sort of has nothing to do with how much you sell the product for in the distributor relationship, right? It has to do with how much they're selling it for. So your margin is related to how much you are selling the product for. Okay. So if you're selling D2C, your margin's based on what you're selling it to the consumer for. If you're selling wholesale direct, your margin is based on what you're selling to the retailer for, right? And then again, if you're selling to distribution, your margin is based on what you're selling to the distributor for. And all three of those prices are very different from each other. We'll talk about that in a little more detail in just a moment. Profit in relation to the cost of a product, that's what markup is. So someone will say, okay, your product costs $2 to make. I'm going to mark it up by 50% and sell it for $3. Right? Whereas if your product costs $2 for a retailer and they're going to mark it up to $3, that's a margin of 33%. And so this is always a part of my presentations on pricing and margin, because I know that this isn't really utilized outside of the food world. And so it's important to understand. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this was just an example here. We could come back to it if anybody wants to see it. But if you were to price your product based on a 33% markup and it costs $2, your product price would be $2.66. Whereas a 33% margin, your product price would be $2.99. Okay. So just, important little details to understand. Mm-hmm. So, okay, we've been talking about cost to produce your product and what margins are. And I'm sure you're probably asking yourselves, but what do margins actually mean to my business? Like, right? How do I know what is a good margin? What is a not so good margin? What's a bad margin, right? This is going to be unique to your business. It's going to be unique to your vision. It's going to be unique to who you are selling to and now and who you want to sell to down the road. And this is incredibly important to remember. I beg you not to go to a CPG chat room and, ask the question and someone will say 40% is the margin, right? 50% is the margin. Don't take their word for it. Take my word for it and other, businesses who've had to shut their doors, who've had to radically change their business models because they were following those instructions and it didn't work for their business, that it will be unique for you and your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So here is not Mount Hope Farms numbers. I want to specify that, but this is that real world example that I was kind of hinting at earlier, where we had a brand who was selling direct to consumer, and their sale price to the customer was $7. Their ingredients, their packaging, and their labor totaled $3.20. Okay. This gave them a gross profit of $3.80 and a gross profit margin of 54%. Now, I've heard many people say 54% margin is good for a CPG brand. It's more than 50% and it's profitable, right? But the question here is, will that $7 retail price support sustainable growth as I move into new channels? Will that 54% allow me to scale, right? Like that question that I posed at the beginning of the presentation, right? Is this enough to avoid getting a few years in and going, I don't know how I'm going to get the money to produce more product to grow the business? Now, as this brand moved from D to C into selling to a retailer, so this is a wholesale direct relationship, they kept their shelf price at $7. So now the retailer, as I was describing, they started taking a 40% margin. And in order for the sale price on the shelf to be $7, when you take 40% from that, the retailer was going to be paying the brand $4.20. Okay. Their cost of goods sold is still $3.20. That has not changed. The gross profit dollars for this channel was $1 per unit, and the gross profit margin was now 23%. The product is still profitable, which is something that people think a lot about, which is important, right? You need to have a profitable product. That's like step number one. But again, is it enough to help you build the business that you want to build? Something else I want to point out here, that if it costs you a $3.20 to make your product, and after you pay for the product that you just sold, you have $1 left to work with. It's not enough to make another product.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And this is critical. This is one of those things that no one taught me in the MBA, right?
This is absolutely valuable. Whoever is listening, this is so good for sustainable growth. It just needs to be considered beforehand.
A lot of people think that 23% margin and that $1 goes to covering those non-cost of goods, I always do this, it's the operating expenses below the gross profit line. But the reality is, and I think I lay this out later in the presentation, so I apologize if I repeat myself, but the reality is that 23%, that $1 needs to be contributing both to your operating costs, but also to making more product. And in this case, you can't even make one more unit. So you can't keep a level amount of productivity and sales in your business without money coming in from the outside in this scenario. And it got worse for this brand, which is the sort of really scary part, when they decided to go through distribution. The shelf price was still $7. The retailer was still taking their 40%. And the retailer was now paying the distributor that $4.20 that on the last slide, the brand was getting, but now the distributor is getting that. And because the distributor was taking an 18% margin, the distributor was paying the brand just $3.44. You can see where this is going, because our cost of goods are still $3.20, right? They were making 24 cents per jar, per unit. It wasn't a jar. And their profit margin was 7%. And this was before, this is just on the product, not to mention any free fills, promotions, chargebacks, retailer marketing, other types of fees that come along with the distributor relationship. And so I wanted to share this example, one, again, because it's real life, and two, because I think it illustrates so clearly why it's so important to know, do I want to grow into distribution for my business long term? Because if I do, and if I want to have a consistent price point across all of my channels, you can price your direct to consumer product such that as you move through, you can be profitable and have margins that work for your business the entire way through.
Oh, this is so great, man. I just want to shout out, Sarah, in the chat. I'm seeing people are really making a comment that it's a good point and they're really happy about this conversation happening.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm glad you said it, because I'm keeping the chat hidden, because I get so like,
yeah, that's why I'm just shouting out to you that it's valuable to our audience.
Amazing. So we have this tool that's called, sometimes I call it the perfect pricing calculator. Sometimes I call it the pricing for profitability calculator. I think it's both. And this allows us to see a side-by-side comparison for the channels that someone may be selling into or may want to sell into the future, right? So this is representative of the brand we just looked at. We can see the retail price, the product price across the top. We can see the margins that the retailer is taking and then that the distributor is taking. And so we can see side by side this information, and you can do this work before you launch your product. Or as you mentioned earlier, Asha, if you launch your product already and you find you're struggling with cash flow, you find that you're having trouble, getting the money to produce more product or to pay your bills, you probably want to check in on your margins and see where they're at for your business.
Good point.
And this is just another example where so that previous one, right, didn't really work out that well. This is an example of hitting a 75% gross profit margin in direct to consumer, allowed this brand at a 50% retailer margin to get 50% gross profit margin selling directly to the retailer, and then 44.4% when selling through a distributor. Now, this is what was right for this particular brand. This is what was right for, how they wanted to grow and where they wanted to be. But something that we're pointing out here is that, here we've got enough money to make another product. This product cost is $1.25, right? At this middle, selling direct to a retailer, they're making just enough money at a 50% margin to make another unit of product. But then when we get to the distribution, we don't, right? We're not making enough money there. And it's not to say, and I think this is an important part, right? It's not to say that you can't or you shouldn't sell through distribution at, say, a 44.5% margin, but knowing that that's what it will be will help you understand, how do I want to structure my sales? How much debt may I need to leverage, right? Where do I want to focus my time and my attention?
Well, that's such a great comparison to show that where do I put my effort, energy, and money, in which direction.
Yeah.
So just a quick question to the previous slide. So
yeah. Let me see if I
I
could
had a distributor, the $1, here. Selling through a distributor, they understood that it's a $1 gross profit dollar, which will not give me enough money to produce a next product out of it. So, of course, the focus is going to go more on selling direct to retailers or the consumers here, right?
Well, so let me advance because I have another slide. And we can come back to these. Specifically. So here, if we assumed with those numbers that all sales were spread evenly across those three channels, meaning 33% was going to D2C, 33 was going to wholesale direct, and 33 was going to distribution, what we have is what's called a blended margin. And that blended margin is 56.3%. So another way to think about it is that 75% margin channel is really helping to support the production of product and growth of those other channels, because it's the only channel that has money to give, essentially.
Okay, yeah,
right?
This is great.
And so you can, again, if you've done this break-even analysis, or you've got, you kind of take these thoughts, you price your product, you think about how you want to grow and the different channels you might want to be in. You can go to one of the tools, like a financial forecasting tool or a break-even tool, and you can calculate, what if I sold 50% to distribution? What if I sold 50% of my sales wholesale direct? How would the margins in those channels affect my overall blended margin? And what does that mean for me as a business owner and for the business in a financial perspective?
That's great. I heard blended margin first time, the profit. Not a number, but yes, I'm understanding. This is so valuable.
Great. Let's see if I have anything else here. So, and then I want to drive home this point too, right? So with a 56.3% blended margin, or it's on your profit and loss statement, it'll say your gross profit margin, right? That means that you have a total of 6.3% of your revenue, that top line revenue, to scale or increase your production, to cover your operating expenses, to pay your taxes, to pay any debts, right, that you might be leveraging and utilizing to grow. So to me, this is such a key thing, right? That 6.3% might be $100 for one brand right now, depending on where they are in the stage of their business. It might be $100,000 for another brand at their stage in their business. So 6.3%, again, means different things to different businesses depending on where they are. So it's neither good nor bad. It's just the reality based on what is happening for a particular business. And then it gives you the insight to know how you're going to need to grow the business, right? Are you going to have enough cash to get yourself to the point where you want to be? Are you going to need to leverage debt, right? In order to grow to a certain point. I wish for everyone that we could have profitable businesses from day one, but the truth is that if you need a production facility, if there are certain things that prevent that for every business. It's not a true reality in today's day and age. So understanding this number and what it means for you can prevent you from finding yourself in a position like the founder who posed that initial question. You'll know, okay, I'm going to have to take out a loan, or I'm going to have to rack up some credit card debt, or I'm going to have to find some investors. And then you are in control of those decisions, right? You're not feeling, oh no, I have to take whatever opportunity or piece this together however I can, right? You can really build it on your own terms from the very beginning.
Absolutely. You feel control in your hand and not just going and swimming in your flow of river. Yeah.
Exactly.
I have some couple questions came before the event in hand, and Sarah, I'm going to shoot up to you. You share specific approach or strategy you have experienced or seen as a pattern that have helped founders effectively manage their cost and maximize their profitability in a CPG world.
Yeah. I think sort of what I just said to Betty is like understanding your margins and when it makes sense to grow into that next like phase of your business, I think is really important. There's a beverage brand that I've been working with for a bit. And when we looked at the numbers, right, we looked at, okay, very similarly, we're producing 1,000 units right now and it's quite expensive. And so selling, to a retailer doesn't make sense. We don't want to do that now. So we're going to focus on D2C. We're going to focus on high-end hotels. Right. So they kind of changed that they have a vision for their business and they identified who their partners could be to maximize their profitability and generate, right, sustainability financially so that they've got a chunk of money that they can have available to them as they grow. And it's I think, knowing your costs, understanding your margins, knowing your operating expenses, and then making a projection. Like there's so much power in a projection because you can kind of see the future of your business, and it sounds redundant to some people to have a financial projection and then also a cash flow projection, but I highly recommend that. We have that for all of our clients where we've got, for example, projections for the next 12 months. And then we also want to see what does this mean for our cash flow, because the projection is going to show you profit or loss month by month. I want to know the money we have in the bank today and what we're projecting to make and spend. How does that play out? Do I ever dip into negative cash flow, or do I run out of money at some point in the future because I'm projecting slow sales in the winter or slow sales in the summer, for example? And you can use that same philosophy and approach to projecting out, when do we launch into the next channel? When do we launch into the next retailer and things like that? So looking ahead, I guess, is the strategy.
Yeah. It's like a proactive state, right? Like you feel prepared to launch the product. And that's what the confidence comes through, that how much you are conscious about your planning, where you want to go. That's why you need to know where is your target, and slowly then you can grow towards it. But it's a proactive and preparation planning. So it makes you feel confident that, okay, by this time I'm going to grow this channel, or by December I'll go here in the channel. So it's more conscious approach, I feel.
Yeah, a little calmer. You're not thinking to yourself, oh, I should be here. It's like, nope, I'm exactly where I need to be, because the plan is to do it at this time when these things are happening. I will add that I've been talking to a lot of founders, and we've been doing a lot of math on something called like the profitability of a customer. So customer profitability. This is especially important if you're going to launch into like a multi-store channel, and absolutely necessary if you're going to work with distributors who are going to get your product into a retailer. Because there are so many asks, like free fills and promotions and discounts and all sorts of things. Have the retailer and the distributor be upfront, and they usually are upfront with what they're going to want, and then create a model that says, that will basically show you, when will I be profitable with this customer, and how profitable will they be? What we have found, sometimes we have to do this retroactively for a client who joins us, partway through. When we find that we have a non-profitable customer, we're generating revenue, but we're actually losing money when we work with them, we make immediate changes to either pull out or to change the promotion plan, or how we're spending money with them, so that we can get profitable. If you're able to do that work up front, you can have what we call transparent negotiations, which I think is just an amazing thing, where you can say to them, I understand that you want these things from me, but I have a model here showing that we won't be profitable. And so for that reason, I can't agree to those. But here's what I can agree to, and why I think it will work well for both of us. And we're seeing that increase the success rate and the financial, outcomes of relationships with new stores and distributors. So I highly recommend that as an approach, as well as you're growing your CPG brand.
Before you leave today, I had one more question to say.
Yeah.
Is there any resources, or is there any daily reads, or any key lessons or piece of advice has helped you to navigate in this financial complexities, especially in the CPG industry, when people are looking for long-term success? What mindset or any practices or lessons you have learned or you would like to share?
That's such a great question. I think number one, so we have this quote that we say inside of our business now, and that is that I am not racing against anyone. I am in my own race, and I have my own finish line, and I will get there when the time is right for me. And when I say me, I truly mean our whole business. And that's the approach that we take. It's so, one of the primary reasons we started the podcast was because the news, the information, the business stories that we're hearing in standard media make you feel bad if you want something different, if you're striving for something different, if you aren't where another brand is. And the reality is that just because someone has investors, because someone has high revenue numbers, it doesn't mean that the business is working on the inside. It doesn't mean that that company is profitable. It doesn't mean that it has longevity. You can have a huge impact and be a small regional brand. I work with many of them. And so I think just a daily meditation practice where you remember and center on, I'm on my own journey and I'm building a business on my terms, one that is right for me and my team and my family. That's the best advice I can give, is to just remind yourself that and try to stay on that path. It is not easy. I have days where I open Instagram and I compare myself to someone else, but at the end of the week, or when I go to my journal, I can get reminded to be on my own. So
that's so wonderful. And that's why I align so much with you, because meditation is a part of my daily practice, and it's about more mindfulness, because it's very easy to get carried away and to compare ourselves with others, but they have been there for excuse me, for a longer time of period, or what you are looking is not the reality, or maybe it's reality, but their team are different. Their situation in the business, the finances, the supporters and team members, the growth is different level. So there's not one-on-one comparison here. I say everybody has a unique mindset. And I recently read the book from the Simon Sinek, which talks about this constellation mindset, that everyone is unique. It's a book called, and I highly recommend everybody to read, The Power of Giving Away Power. It is a book where he's sharing, and which I practice in my studio too, as my culture and value with my team, that every person has a uniqueness. It's about collaboration and collaborative effort. We learn from each other. We are needed and they are also needed. Exactly as your product is needed in the market, user needs you and you also need users. So it's a more collaborative approach, and being aware of their pain point and needs, and be really conscious about every step, what is working for you.
Yeah.
Unique to you. What is your authentic value? What do you stand by? Of course, as we discussed, vision and mission is very important, but what drives you to get up night 2 o'clock and run to do things? Is that. So what is your energy, and how can you, as this is such a valuable lesson you gave, to make them feel confident financially also, just not to craft a product or build a brand, but this is like a core soul and the holistic approach to feel financially also it's possible to be ready. Not need any big capital or big investor in the starting, that's such a valuable insight you gave, that being a small brand, also you can grow in a regional or it's just what intention you are setting, and be aware about it. And of course your meditation practice or any sources of reading and journaling out. If meditation doesn't work, that's great. What works for you, find that out, and journaling out and clear your thought. And we are here to help you. Please approach Sarah anytime you have any financial complexities and don't feel to take a next step. Go and be a part of your community, and she generously give value. If you do not have that time, when you are driving, just switch on her podcast and you will see so much value you will get out of it. So, and I'm here to your support if you are having unclarity about brand and what you stand for, what's your purpose, and get clarity so you and your team, sales member, everybody's talking same language, same visuals, and be a cohesive on all the platform. We are here to help you. Thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you for all the comments. I was just reading through them. Thank you, everybody. And I will say too, I highly recommend the book called Small Giants to anyone who is here who maybe does want to be a smaller brand, or who is thinking, I don't know that I want to be, a big national, business. It is a very wonderful book based on real examples of real business owners, a few of them in the food space. So great resource for helping you to remember and to build that business on a small, on your own terms as well. So.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Sarah for joining us too.
Thank you for having me.